Hello and thank you so much for staying tuned to Champions TV. This is Nature Talk and I'm your host Grace Acheng. Among the threats to the environmental today is climate change, habitat destruction, overexploitation of natural resources, and the invasive species. Today our discussion is going to be based on the invasive species because of the adverse effects that this has to the environment. Our guest in studio today is an ecologist and he is going to tell us more about how the invasive species can be introduced into our country, what are some of the effects of the invasive species, and finally, what are some of the management strategies that can be put in place in order to ensure that this threat does not put us in a compromising situation, that is the present and the future generations. So once again, welcome to our studios, Mr. Keegan, and just begin by telling us what we mean by invasive species.
Invasive species, they are just the same as any other vegetation, any other species that are around the world or in an ecosystem. Invasive species are different from the other crops because the factor remains that invasive species have certain function, but then their function is misplaced. They have a function, but then the ecosystem that they are different. Now they become an ex situ species. So when we talk about invasive species, are species that we are using, we are either using or we are not using, but they are in a different place. We can talk of an example of invasive species. The common invasive species are the species of water hyacinth. You've seen in the country that water hyacinth has bloomed and spread all over in most of the lakes of Kenya, such as Lake Victoria. There is a dam in Nairobi. If you've known any dam in Nairobi, there is a dam near Kibera called Nairobi Dam. The water hyacinth has almost covered fully, if it is not the waste products from the nearby industries. So that is one of the invasive species. There are so many other invasive species that are around the country. I might also talk of the history of that water hyacinth. Water hyacinth was brought to the country as an ornamental plant. These flowers and things that you give other your friends and families as gifts and presents turns to be destructive plants. Yeah, so that is how water hyacinth came to Kenya. Yeah. And
actually this water hyacinth is actually a very, very big problem to us today, because I've seen it's also invading the Rift Valley lakes, and so sad it is also in a dam in Nairobi. And actually you have talked of being introduced as an ornamental plant. What are some of other examples of the ways they come into our country?
Some of the ways are funny. You could, if they are edible species, you can find that whatever products or people that are traveling around the world might carry them in their either food products, could be even in the threads of your shoes or in your stomachs. Yeah, that's how they spread. Yeah.
Okay. And what are some of these characteristics of these invasive plant species?
The characteristics are they outgrow the other vegetations. Their intake, the mineral intake of these crops are a bit sophisticated more than the other crops. You find that they grow faster than the common crops and and vegetations. Yeah.
And actually, we have weeds, species which are weeds, and we have invasive species. So how do we differentiate weeds and invasive species?
Now, that is where the confusion comes in ecology. Invasive species and weeds they can play the same role, but then they come differently. Invasive species becomes intolerant now when it comes to control of weeds and these other unwanted crops in the farmland. Weeds can be controlled, and weeds there is one difference between the weeds and invasive species that can arise from whether that weed is native to that land or just it's bloomed because of adjacent land. But then for invasive species are totally uncontrolled, and they came from a different, could be a different part of the globe. Yeah, but then for weeds they are just around. Yeah.
And actually, you have talked of the weeds and invasive species. Now, you have talked of weeds being controlled. By what methods? I mean,
for me and my encounters, I've been controlling the weeds by either mechanical or biological. When it comes to most of the weeds that affect my crops in my either upcountry or my gardens around, I use some biological weapons. So that is either trees that are around that attracts birds, that feeds on the insects that could help in pollination of the flowers, and that is production of their seeds and spreading of the same weed. So apart from that, you could use also some other biological methods that have been incorporated in the weeds control. Example of, if you want to find a biological control fertilizer or a liquid that uses biological deterrents that I've been using. One of them is called
but they are just environmental friendly. Okay. And what are some of the effects of the invasive species to us, the environment at large, wildlife included, and even socially?
There are so many effects of invasive species on our environment, and they are specifically on our farms. One of them is space. They take over the space of the spatial air and the soil that we are using for either for crops. One of the example of space problem is this species called Lantana camara, that when you plant as a live fence, it becomes a threat to other crops. One of them is it affects the undergrowth, then the nutritional and the mineral uptake is more as compared to the adjacent crops. Then again, because it grows laterally instead of vertically, and either providing good shade and fencing, but then it now grows laterally, so it takes the space around. Yeah, then management of it is a bit harder.
Yes. And again, it offers the shade, so no plant will grow under it.
Undergrowth, yeah.
What other effects are there? Especially, you can bring the issue of Prosopis juliflora, like the madenge.
The juliflora has affected both wildlife and crops, and even in our developments, like structural development. When you plant a juliflora, or rather when it comes by itself as an invasive species, you find that the roots of that tree species are deep and they move laterally, so they come into the houses and any other structures that leads to destruction and property loss and and pathway distractions.
Okay, so this invasive species now, it's a threat, but whose problem is it? Is it our problem, the government, nature itself? What is your opinion about whose problem it is?
The responsibility of control of this juliflora, also known as matenke, is a collective issue. So you could find that the local community have no awareness on the control of these species, and the same, you find that the big researchers and institutions that have knowledge on the same do not give awareness and action on the same. You also find that the government have maybe limited resources towards and funds towards the control and management of these species. So it's a combined responsibility and the weakness of the society at all.
Okay. So once again, thank you so much for staying tuned to Champions TV. Remember, you can join our conversation by sending us a direct text message to the number displayed on the screen. You can also join us via Facebook by sending us your comments at Champions TV Kenya or on our Instagram page at Champions TV Kenya. We will be right back after the break.